Well, this all certainly justifies a calling in of the members. We have three from today's committee hearings. Liberal Randy Boisonneau is a special advisor to the Prime Minister. Conservative MP Michael Cooper is the vice chair of the committee, and Marie Rankin, the NDP member of the committee. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. Nice to have you with us. All right. You heard Michael Wernick right in front of you. He said there's nothing to see here. The story's false. There are errors in it. It could be defamatory. Michael Cooper, it's all over, isn't it?
Far from it. In fact, after today, there's even more evidence that there was inappropriate interference and potentially illegal interference by the Prime Minister in the prosecution of SNC Lavalin.
What's the evidence?
It's important to go through the timeline. Mr. Wernick revealed that he was at that September 17th meeting with former Attorney General Wilson Raybould, where she unequivocally stated that she would not overturn the decision of the Director of Public Prosecutions not to negotiate a deferred prosecution agreement. Following that, there was a concerted campaign to change her mind. We know Gerald Butts, the Prime Minister's top advisor, met with Jody Wilson-Raybould specifically on the SNC Lavalin prosecution on December 5th. But more significantly, as we learned from the clerk of the Privy Council today, is that on December 19th, he met with the Prime Minister and top PMO officials about the prosecution and then took it upon himself to pick up the phone, call Jody Wilson-Raybould, and tell her that there were concerns about economic and other considerations, which by the way, cannot be considered in a DPA. And then what happened next? Well, Jody Wilson-Raybould was fired from Cabinet as Attorney General.
Okay, hold on, Randy. Murray, I got to get your thoughts here on whether you're seeing more dots connecting this to a political interference allegation, or did the story take a hit today?
No, lots more dots, Don. I mean, we have certainly, it appears, an attempt to politically interfere with an independent officer. The Attorney General deciding whether charges are laid or what goes on must be independent of even the Prime Minister. That much is clear. But what you can't do is inappropriately pressure that person. That's what the rules seem to be. Right. She gets this call. She gets many, many meetings with Mr. Butts, it appears, and others in his office. And the clerk calls and says, really serious problem here. What happens is she leaves. She writes a letter saying, got to speak truth to power when she resigns, you'll recall. And you know, it's really important that an Attorney General be independent. And she then stood up yesterday in the House of Commons and wanted to speak her truth. What's going on here? People have a right to infer that she thought there was an inappropriate interference with her judgment as an Attorney General.
Okay, I'd like to get your thoughts. I suspect you don't quite agree with these two theories that the evidence actually piled up higher today.
Well, and I honor my two colleagues and their work, but I'm not sure they heard what I heard in the meeting from either the Justice Minister Lametti or from Minister Wernick. And I was really struck by his testimony off the start, where he's nervous. And I said I was, shared some of his fears about attacks on democracy, about what's going to happen in our next election.
That was very interesting.
And about safeguards to our institutions and the importance of the rule of law. And that in this country, the police and the justice system are completely insulated from and protected from politics and from politicians. And they are. And look, what he said was, we can't mix up facts. We can't conflate facts. That's not how a rule of law country works. And so to take some random dates and to try to have people infer that something did or didn't happen, that's not helpful to our institutions. We will hear from Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould. She will be able
Tuesday,
to.
Right?
We're working on the scheduling. I'm hoping it's early next week. And we will hear what she has to say, and she will be able to speak her truth. And I think that's important.
Will she?
That's
something I don't know.
She doesn't seem to think so. I mean, it's one thing for Mr. Wernick to say, well, he doesn't think solicitor-client privilege applies, but Jody Wilson-Raybould, based upon what she said in the House of Commons yesterday, to say that she wants to speak her truth and that there's only one person who can waive her privilege, which is the Prime Minister. The fact that she said it indicates that Jody Wilson-Raybould doesn't feel that she has the ability to come to committee and say all that she wants to say.
I wouldn't put words into her mouth.
Well, I will get Murray to comment, because Wernick did quite clearly say that in his view, she wasn't acting as a solicitor at the time.
Yeah.
So there is no solicitor-client privilege.
Precisely. That was an answer to a question I asked him. And then, of course, Mr. Lametti, the Minister of current Attorney General and Minister of Justice, what did he say in his testimony? Maybe the solicitor-client privilege, maybe not. Who can waive it? I don't know. But I'm working on an opinion. I've got hundreds and hundreds of lawyers.
Let's be
I'm sure
fair,
I'm going to
Murray.
have that
Come on
opinion.
now.
I'm sure it's going to be shared with Canadians. Duh, it's not.
On Wednesday.
Yeah, it's all coming up.
Look, Mr. Lametti was very clear that there's some things he could answer today. There's some things he couldn't answer. He's been asked by the Prime Minister to look at solicitor-client privilege. He's doing that. And Miss Jody Wilson-Raybould has retained the best legal counsel in the country in Thomas Cromwell, former Supreme Court Justice. And we want her to come and speak to the committee. It's why we asked her to come to the committee. And so we will hear from her next week.
I want to ask you something, Michael, on this one. That one thing that Wernick did say is, you know, if Wilson-Raybould really thought there was an improper pressure being applied to her on this one to cave, she should have picked up the phone and called the PMO switchboard and said, put me through to Justin. I got to talk to him. Why didn't she do that, do you think?
We don't know exactly what happened, and that's why we do need to hear from Jody Wilson-Raybould, but it's also important that we hear from officials in the PMO, including Gerald Butts and Matthew Bouchard and others who were up to their eyeballs in this matter. So I think what we did learn today was that there's a lot of questions and more evidence that there was political interference. And that should really concern Canadians, because at the end of the day, we're talking about an independent decision that was made by the Director of Public Prosecutions and a concerted campaign to overturn that decision. And when it comes to the independence of the Attorney General, it is the Attorney General and the Attorney General alone, without interference, who gets to make the call in terms of the initiation of prosecution.
No evidence, Michael.
If the Globe's right, Globe had another bombshell today when it said basically it found out what went on in cabinet, where she apparently told her former fellow cabinet ministers, hey, I felt improper interference on this file, and so that's why I'm where I am. And I'm curious about that, Murray. Again, I go back to the point, if she felt that, she should have acted sooner, should she not?
I don't know. I mean, if a person's being bullied in the schoolyard and we're supposed to be told, well, go and talk to that bully, I'm not entirely sure that squares with how I lived my life as a young person. I mean, frankly, I don't get it. You're supposed to go and talk to someone because what you're not supposed to do as Prime Minister or as anybody in the office of the Prime Minister or indeed even as the clerk is try to tell her what she should do and to pressure her on a phone call, which he says he didn't do, but she clearly felt somebody pressured her. And the other story that we haven't talked about is, why is the former Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, Mr. Butts, why did he resign? Why did he resign? And why did he talk about Wilson-Raybould, Madam Wilson-Raybould, when he resigned? No one's ever told us why. Doesn't that make people ask serious questions?
Nobody but Murray is using language of bullies. Let's be clear. Let's stay in the language of facts. Let's stay in the language of what we heard from Mr. Wernick today. And it's very clear that what he said was it's totally appropriate for Prime Minister office officials to have a conversation with an Attorney General about an active case. When I asked him directly, did he ever witness any inappropriate pressure applied to the former Attorney General in this matter, his categorical answer was no.
Was he there in meetings with Mr. Butts? Was he there in meetings with Mr. Bouchard? How does he know what happened or didn't happen when he wasn't in the room?
Let's stick to the facts, Murray.
I can't glimpse the future, but I suspect we're heading down the road to where we're going to quibble over what she felt and what the Prime Minister and his office staff intended to do. They're going to say, I didn't intend to do any pressure. She's going to say, I felt it. No, I felt improper.
That's for the Ethics Commissioner to decide. That's the Ethics Commissioner to decide, and that's what Mr. Wernick said today.
He decides on a much narrower perspective.
He's the officer of Parliament to make that call.
That's what their goal is now. The Liberals want to talk only about the Commissioners. If we don't have a legitimate role as a Justice Committee to find out whether there was inappropriate interference with the administration of justice in Canada, if we can't do that at the Justice Committee, where can we do it?
That's what we're doing.
And with all those meetings, talking about jobs, talking about economic considerations, if that is not pressure, I don't know what is.
It's not pressure. It's balancing public policy priorities, which is what we do as a government.
Ms. Wilson-Raybould doesn't seem to think so.
That's what we do. We'll hear from her. Don't put words in her mouth.
Well, I hope
we can hear from her.
Hopefully we'll hear from her. I find it very curious that everyone seems to have an opinion on solicitor-client privileges, except for the Attorney General, who was asked, almost 2 weeks ago.
How many thousand lawyers does he have?
2, I think, thousand lawyers or something.
He wouldn't
this sounds like a foot-dragging exercise, doesn't it?
Not at all. This sounds like a very complex issue of law that is layered in complexity that we have to make sure, and the Minister was very clear about this, and so was Mr. Wernick, that there are 2 cases that are going to trial.
That's true.
And we cannot say things in our Justice Committee, and the Attorney General can certainly not make comments that could jeopardize how that trial could turn out. That is the fundamental tenet of our justice system, the independence. And as AG, that's his call, and it's his call to make. And he is working on this, and that's what I took from today.
The issue before the courts is whether or not SNC Lavalin contravened the criminal code. That is not what our committee is looking at. What our committee is looking at is whether there was undue or inappropriate political interference in the prosecution of SNC Lavalin, period. So, two separate issues.
Exactly right. Couldn't put it better.
Couldn't put it better. Do you think you're going to get a clearance from her for her to speak by Tuesday, or do you think we're heading?
She wants to speak her truth. She's told Canadians that. And the person who stands in the way of that is a person named Justin Trudeau.
The other thing that's going to get bottom line, I can just see this Justice Committee forming this way, Liberal majority, opposition minority. There's going to be two reports out of this at the end, because you're going to see it one way and they're going to see it entirely another.
Well, I can say, look, the Prime Minister, in a letter that was issued to SNC Lavalin, said very clearly, I'm not meeting with you. You meet with the Attorney General. This is her call. So the Prime Minister has asked Mr. Lametti, the Attorney General, to look into the issue of clients' solicitor privilege, and that is what he undertook to do today.
10, 12 days ago.
The world is you get people
who
work for you to do so. How many meetings did the company have with people in the PMO? Was it 24? And you don't get the Prime Minister to do it. You don't get Wernick. There are other people who can deliver a very strong message on your behalf. That's how the world works.
Last question to you, or a quick thought from each of you. Is Michael Wernick a credible witness, or is he co-opted into a partisan role?
Well, look, I think that Mr. Wernick's testimony was helpful today. He provided some additional information that we didn't have, that raise more questions and speak to the need for answers from some key PMO officials and potentially the Prime Minister himself. So that's how I would characterize his testimony today.
I think that's well put. And, you know, Mr. Boissonneau, Randy made a very helpful comment at the start of his testimony. This is a public servant of 37 years who's worked for conservative and liberal politicians, governments over those years. I respect his service to Canada, and I thanked him for that. So I have nothing bad to say about him. He did provide us some very helpful leads, if I can call it that. We're going to track those leads down.
Okay, and he's served conservative masters before, too. So.
Conservatives, Liberals, unassailable integrity, 37 years in the job. And he also said that he will make available whatever the Ethics Commissioner needs to conclude his work. So he really, helped me understand some things today, too. And
it was very interesting. All right. I commend people to go watch it if you can find a copy of that. All right. Thank you all. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of you. You're back on Monday or Tuesday?
Monday.
Monday. Anyone who's speaking on Monday?
Shawcross and remediation.
Woo. Okay. Talk to you then. All right. Thank you. Shawcross. All right. Coming up, we head to Washington.